Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Scott Curtis. I am a teaching and learning librarian at UMKC Libraries. And we are here this afternoon for the session, What do students think of OER in textbooks? Voices of Students at a Regional Missouri University. Our speakers today are Stephanie Hallam, who is the Education Information Librarian at Southeast Missouri State University, James Newman, who is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science, Philosophy, and Religion at Southeast Missouri State University, and Mary Bangert, who is the Government Information and Literacy Librarian at Southeast Missouri State University. Stephan, I have a few little things to say for everybody, just little housekeeping notes. Live captioning is available during this presentation. You can toggle this on and off using the attendee controls at the bottom of your screen. This session will be recorded and provided on the conference website following the conference. Please enter all questions into the Q&A box. We will do our best to answer them either at the end or as they are received. We encourage you to engage with us and the other attendees through the chat function. If you are having technical difficulties, you can contact the organizers using the link at the bottom of the Schedule site. So Stephanie, James, and Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott, so much for that introduction. One last thing I'd like to introduce is the institution we're coming from. We're coming from Southeast Missouri State University, and our research is really focused on the students there. So a little bit of context, we have about 9,000 undergraduate students, and we'll get a little bit more into the demographics in just a moment. So one other thing to introduce are a few terms. Being that you're here at an OER conference, you're probably very familiar with this, but just to provide a little bit more information about how we see it at our institution, the OER are going to be those open educational resources, and then the AER would be affordable educational resources. So these would be things that are copyrighted, but they don't cost students any additional fees. So maybe something like an ebook that is linked through a permalink from the library, or a journal article from the library, or even a copyrighted website that they can freely access that has additional information and used for instructional purposes. The other little thing that will help with context for our study is at our institution, most, not all, but most of the undergraduate courses, students can rent all of the textbooks. So if there's a couple of books or even just one, it's only $35 for the entire course, and they only get that textbook for the semester. So we are a textbook rental program institution.
Okay, well, to start off a little bit with our literature review, students and faculty view OER with the same legitimacy as traditional text. This is a little bit of an overview of a literature review. I promise I will not get into the entire literature review of this topic, but one of the things we want to make sure is that the quality and the content, that's one of the first things faculty often ask about OER, and there's kind of this perception if something's free, then is it worthless? Well, the content in A and OER basically has the same legitimacy among faculty and students as traditional text. Once faculty take a look at it and realize what can be done with it and how people can customize it, then they are viewing the legitimacy as the same as a textbook, especially since a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is created in the exact same way a textbook is created, that peer review process. And one of the things we also considered as far as, part of why we're trying to sell this, if you will, to faculty, is that the students rate faculty using OER is more kind, encouraging, and creative, okay, than faculty members using a traditional copyrighted textbook. They also note that increasing the satisfaction of increased satisfaction rating of professors who use the OER, and these are the reasons that the faculty tend to enjoy higher ratings from students. And also the students perceive OER as more convenient than traditional textbooks. primarily because of the electronic mode in which they can access them and the convenience and such, as opposed to the physical book. And a lot of this comes from the literature was created, the data sources are surveys and focus groups, and we used the literature on these two areas to develop the questions and for the students that we surveyed, in addition to the focus groups that we interviewed during our research this past spring. Briefly, how we got on this. So I developed a course on senior seminar. We have a senior seminar. It came my time to teach it. I decided to teach this thing using 100% OER. And I went around telling all my students, hey, guess what we're going to be doing? We're going to have OER and free textbooks and all that kind of stuff. And I did this twice. And I talked to my students about it. And even when I would talk to them, they didn't seem like they really cared if it was OER or not. Then even after the course was over, so I asked them and talked to them, and I was able to contact most of the students in both of my sections, and it wasn't a consideration for why they took my course. So I just sat there and said, okay, so I'm reading all this on OER. It says, oh, do it, students love it, and now I'm doing it, and they don't seem to care. Well, maybe I should try and expand the case study, if you will, expand this and talk to more students and talk to them about different types of courses, because maybe there are things unique to that particular course, because the students were saying, well, the time, and I had to take senior seminar anyway, the topic seemed interesting, I heard you weren't too much work and that kind of thing. So those things definitely took higher preference than the cost of the textbook. So I thought maybe there's, and the literature doesn't really get into this, like the preference concept. So I thought, why don't we try and expand this and see if we can get a better, more clear picture of why students are taking, student attitudes about OER and why they might choose a course because of OER compared to other reasons. Okay.
So,
No. I think that's you, Stephanie.
Okay, so we applied for an internal grant and we submitted a proposal in November, and the focus for, or premise for getting the internal grant was to sponsor gift cards as an incentive to get students to complete the surveys. We got approval in late January, then we submitted our IRB to get approval for that in March, and we surveyed the students in April, and at the very end of April, those that were surveyed were then invited to 2 focus groups, and we're going to talk a little bit about the results of those.
So in the spring of 2023, we did survey 422 undergraduate students. We actually surveyed, we sent emails out to all the undergraduate students. We received 422 responses. And if you'd like to see that survey, you can see it in its entirety with that tiny URL there, that QR code. 16 of the questions, of those 16 questions, 7 of them were demographic. We did get 5.5% of the student body to respond. And on this next slide, you'll see that the folks that did respond were representative of the university pretty much. Now, I will point out that we did have a higher percent of Pell Grant eligible students than was representative of the university. And I don't think that's a surprise because as mentioned earlier in one of the sessions here today in this conference, first generation and low income college students benefit more from OER. So it stands to reason that students eligible for Pell Grants might be more willing to weigh in on their perceptions of OER, as it would impact the cost that they would have to pay for courses. The other thing that I do want to point out is that we did have a little bit higher representation of those higher GPAs, but that also, we thought, well, I can understand that those students that have higher GPAs are probably going to be more engaged. They're going to be students who look at their emails, answer their emails, and perhaps are more interested in scholarship and would like to be involved in that. So those are our numbers. And when we got back those surveys, we did find significantly that a full 13% of students reported access to required materials is a significant barrier to reading and assigned text. And we do want to reduce barriers for students. So I think access is a very important point throughout this study. We found that when a professor assigns required reading, students answered, how often do you actually read it? Well, 6% of them said never. The most of them, 32%, said rarely. And it went all the way down to 9% said they always read it. However, on this next slide that you'll see, we asked the question that if required reading materials were included and linked into your Canvas course or, other learning management system, Canvas is what we use here at Southeast, how often would you read those required materials that a professor assigns? And wow, we saw the increase. Most of the time, 46% answered that they would read those required materials. And you'll see that 0% answered that they would never read them. And so if you look at these two graphs superimposed on each other, you'll see quite a difference in the responses when required materials are linked into that learning management system. Additionally, 42.4% of students reported that they would actually take more hours each semester if there were no textbook costs. Now, that's what they expected. We'd have to see if that pans out. Let's go to the next slide. So we did find in that survey of those 422 students, they said that they would read more, and these are their expectations. Students also said that they would enroll in more hours. And later on, Stephanie's going to talk about our focus group, in which students said they would select courses that offer free textbooks. And so at this point, I'd like to just pause for a moment and see if there were any questions about our survey or the responses that we received.
So far, there are no questions in the Q&A, but people, please do put something in the Q&A or in the chat window, and we will get them answered.
And if you don't have anything now, that's fine. We'll have time to answer questions at the end as well.
Okay, well, we'll go on for right now. So the next thing I want to talk about is the focus groups. So from those 422 students that responded to the survey, as a portion of the survey, they could indicate if they were interested in participating in a focus group. And from those, we randomly selected students, and we had two groups of students. There were two different sessions with a total of 15 students in all. Each session was 8 hours, and was 1 hour, and there were 8 questions. And here on this next slide, you can see all of the questions that we asked. And most of these questions were really follow-up questions to what was asked in the survey, just to give a little bit more context and elaborate on how they answered or why they answered the way they did in the survey. And the other unique thing you'll see here, questions 7 and 8 aren't related to the survey itself, but a little bit more specifically to OER. And so we did actually show them a modern world history OER textbook, and we have a QR code to it as well as a URL. You're welcome to see that. We did pick a modern world history textbook because by spring, most, if not all, of the students in their academic career would have taken some sort of modern world history course. So they would have contextual knowledge when they're looking at the textbooks to see what they think of it and give feedback on it. We also briefly described the OER initiative we have at Southeast and talking about their initial reactions and impressions once they heard about that. So the first thing, students gave lots of information about what they preferred in textbooks. And these are not surprising things, at least some of the initial ones. They're really helpful for students as they're looking to master information and study and understand different concepts, such as practice questions, application examples, summaries, and a lot of these relate to the more visual learners that we're starting to see amongst students in college right now, such as images and diagrams, bolded terms, and then just locating the information through tables of context and indexes. Now, these were a few surprising things. Students really wanted timeless information. They wanted things that weren't going to change right away in the textbook, such as maybe a statute or a specific statistic. They want something that they could reference in the future again. They also really appreciated information from professional organizations. They really saw those as experts in the field. And lastly, of course, this is not surprising, but since we are a textbook rental, have a textbook rental program, those notes from previous students, they found very valuable as they were doing their studies. Now, of course, in addition to the things that they liked about textbooks, they were very open with what they did not like about textbooks. And this was mentioned in an earlier presentation today, was like, do the textbooks actually get used? So they were frustrated if they had to rent or maybe even purchase a specific textbook and it wasn't being used. And teachers will even say, if you don't really need it if you're not doing poorly in the class. Then they were looking at, do we really need a textbook? Are there better ways of teaching things than in textbooks? There were a number of students that were very frustrated with outdated information, such as legislation. As for example, this quote, "There are rules included in textbooks that aren't even legal anymore." And a lot of our students simply don't take backpacks, so they're not going to be taking their textbooks if the professor asks for them to open up their textbooks, reference it, or ask questions about it. So that was a frustration. Even some of the students mentioned that professors gave points for that, but they really didn't like carrying their textbooks around campus. And then when we showed them the sample OER, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. We had a number of seniors that were in one of our focus groups, and they wished that they had had that when they were coming in. They wanted to know when they'd be available. They thought it was very beneficial both for time saving, for money saving, and the accessibility feature, being able to have it wherever they were at, and then the searchability accessibility available through that. For example, the Control F, or being able to take it on their laptop. So I will give you a few moments here and you can read through some of these quotes. And we do have these slides shared too, so you can reference these later too. Okay, and then through our discussions, we learned a few things about how students are maybe not even aware of what's required with materials for courses. All the information is posted on a website where students can look up if there is a textbook that is available for rental or for purchase, how much that would cost, if there are specific platforms that they need to purchase for maybe homework related resources, but that's separate from where they go to register for the courses. So when, as a student sits here, when we sign up, we don't see what classes require textbooks or not, because that's, as I said, in a different portal. So sometimes they feel it's a little bit out of control. Maybe it's just required with a major that they have to take the textbooks. And sometimes freshmen, they get their courses recommended. They may feel that it's already selected for them. Of course, they can change those if they want to, but that's another thing that they just don't understand that. So if OER was an option, this gets back to what Mary found, would it influence your course selection? And this was also what James was wondering, like, why didn't they think about that? They said, I mean, this would be huge. It would save them money. And if you know college students at all, the statement of I would wake up early in the morning for a class that would provide these free resources speaks a lot about the priority that they would give this. And then this gets back to one of those, some of those articles that we had in the literature review was, it would influence my decision on whether or not I would feel more appreciated in my class. So I would feel a professor cares about my needs, cost, time, responsibility, and I would want to be with that professor in that course. So that care, that consideration that a student would feel because of a faculty member selecting an OER. Okay, any questions at this point? That was a summary of the focus group.
We did have a comment that about some of the feedback. You had me at free. This is a really great feedback you all received. Someone else just said, maybe I missed it, but you mentioned something about first generation students and Pell eligible students. Have you done any partnerships with someone working in first generation student supports like the TRIO program to promote OER courses and explain what OER is and why it would be beneficial to them?
That is a great idea. We've worked more in general with faculty members, but we do have a very vibrant TRIO program on campus, and that is definitely something to consider and explore. Thank you.
I also really like the doing the focus groups, because a lot of times we're tempted to do a survey and we're tempted to just go with the results from a survey. But the focus group questions being a little bit more open-ended, you really got to get those kind of unfiltered comments that you have in the feedback. And sometimes showing that to professors is very important. And I do think that the comment about a student feeling like they felt that they were valued by the professor for their decision, the professor's decision to use OER. I think that's something that doesn't get said by the students, but it definitely is like a tacit thing that is an influencer in whether they will take a class, even if they don't speak it out loud.
Yes, and I think that's really important, especially post-COVID, feeling that connection with the professor and feeling that there's personal respect and care for them as a student is really important for students now. Okay. Oops.
All righty, a few things, kind of summarizing some things that we learned. The students are not uniform in course selection and decision making. They had quite a few priorities in terms of why they take a particular course. They like the idea of OER courses. The engaged students completed the survey, but they often did not read all the assigned materials. Basically, the students we had were a little bit more engaged than the typical student. One thing also you noticed, we were a little bit heavy on seniors and so forth because they had some experience in dealing with this. So it might not be the most representative sample of the student body as a whole on the four-year spectrum, but they are students who at least were familiar with it and had something to say about it. They definitely gave us their textbook preferences and their challenges. They talked about things they didn't like about textbooks in the more traditional manner. And also the students acknowledged that, well, how are we going to find out about the cost of textbooks? And they weren't real familiar with that process. And it's not readily available to students when they register. And they also acknowledged that embedding course materials, things they need to read inside the online learning system, that they say that would increase reading because it would make it more convenient when they have their free time with their phone, and they could actually use their the phone to access the content. Whereas today they're otherwise, if it's all in a textbook, they, as they mentioned before, they're not carrying that textbook with them, so they don't have access to the book very often. So a few things that we think that the OER will assist with in trying to solve some of these problems and address their concerns is it will improve access and use. Students won't have to wait until they get certain money. They'll have access the very first day of the course to the textbook, that they can access the course and hopefully use it anywhere. Also, the OER format allows for updating materials often by faculty. Of course, you know, OER is a very broad spectrum, not one particular source, but it does allow for faculty to develop the course and, you know, let their voice be heard in the course and use OER to educate and customize this. And by using this, they can update it and make things as current as possible. Obviously, it'll, and much of OER will help you avoid copyright violation because it's all kind of in the common license. I'm not the copyright expert, actually. One of my colleagues, Stephanie, is more familiar with that, but and she'll explain copyright codes better than I can. But one thing we learned at our school is that while the tutors that students may use have access to textbooks through textbook rental, they do not have access to the textbooks that the students have to purchase. So when a student goes to get help, well, one, the student better be bringing that textbook, and the tutor doesn't have a way to kind of prepare. But if the book's free, it can be accessed by anyone, then the tutor can more likely be able to prepare and assist that student. And all the things that we're kind of talking about address kind of the two big goals of universities right now, such as meeting the mission and strategic plan of getting more students, making college more affordable, and reducing dropout rates, okay, by improving retention and maybe improving success because they'll have access to the content certainly much more than they do now.
So what might happen if one used OER in a university? Well, this is, as Murray mentioned earlier, a little bit hypothetical. We do have an OER initiative on campus. It's a little fledgling at this point, so we're kind of extrapolating potential benefits. So they might be able to take more hours if the textbook costs were lower. They might think you, instructor or university, actually really cared for them a lot more if the textbooks were free. They might read more of the assigned materials and thus probably completing courses at a better GPA, having lower withdrawal rates, as was mentioned in an earlier presentation today. And then tutors would have access to those materials. Just as a side note, after I gave this presentation internally, the tutoring center invited me, and the tutors not only found some books that could be used for specific courses, but they found some things that could be used to supplement their tutoring, to give ideas for students to kind of help master the same material that they are getting in their textbook, but just maybe not understanding it through their textbook. I could also distinguish a university from another institution. And then with that improved potential GPA, that could again help retain those students, whether that be retaining scholarships, having higher graduation rates, especially if they want to go on for advanced degrees, any of those kinds of things. It would really open up those doors for students. And I guess the bottom line that we're saying is all these benefits, it really depends on what happens in the future and how much of it gets adopted at our institution. So here's an example of what has happened so far. These are just 2 courses. There are other courses at our institution that do use A and OER. So 2 years ago, our UI 100, it's kind of a basic introduction to the university course for students, the 1 credit class, and students were purchasing the textbook. It was only $35, but we did make that embedded into the course, and you can see the savings from that. And then we have EN 140, which is the basic introduction to English course, and that just got piloted this year. And with those 2 gen ed classes, you can see the savings over the course of 2 semesters for each course, which is quite significant.
We have a comment in the chats. It says, not a question, but a comment. Your data reflects the anecdotal feedback I get from my students. The math department at Missouri State has adopted the OpenStax calculus texts for our calculus sequence. Every calc class I teach, I ask students for their feedback on the text, and I hear many of the comments you shared, especially the free part. Some other faculty in my department are beginning to develop their own OER for other courses. Now we need to get administration to better support this development of OER.
Thank you for bringing that up, Cameron. We're continuing, we're actually working on publishing our findings, and as we are doing so, we are finding some very recent studies that have come out that are echoing what we're finding after they have been implemented on campuses. So these are not just predictive, they have actually been shown and proven that these are reactions students have once A and OER initiatives are running strong on campuses. So what are some possible next steps? Depends, of course, on your context and your institution. Just as James mentioned, there's such a range in OER. There's also such a range in implementation and needs at different institutions. But some of the things that we thought might be helpful is possibly finding information for students when they register for classes about the cost of those courses, just so they could understand that right away. And then marketing the success. When we first made the announcement last in fall of 22 about the UI 100, the news crew actually came to campus to interview people. They got so excited to hear about all the savings for a 1 credit class for students. So does anyone have any comments, other ideas?
In the chat, I could definitely see benefits within the teacher ed program. When I was going through the program, class of 18, I would have loved to have had access to open educational resources just to have in my teacher toolkit. Do you have plans to build out the program through the education department? Go Redhawks.
Excellent comment. That actually piggybacks on a comment that a student made during the focus group, where they were actually doing a certification exam, and I believe it was for accounting, but they didn't have any of their previous textbooks to reference to prepare for the test because they were rented textbooks and they had to return them back. And yes, we are working with the education department. I'm actually the liaison to the education department. So yes, we're working on things, but that is another thing that we're doing is we're curating resources, OER resources, and I'm sharing those with future educators that they have as things in their toolkit when they go into teaching. So yes, it kind of goes full circle at that point.
My experience from UMKC is that a library doesn't have enough initially to deploy it everywhere. So it is good to find their department that's interested and see if you can go in depth in a department. So going into education sounds like a great one. we did a lot of things with the School of Nursing and Health Studies here, and that seemed to spark a lot of interest. And then those faculty end up talking to other faculty, and then other faculty want to duplicate that kind of success.
Interesting that you mentioned that, and this is the guide, and it does have some of those resources for K-12. But I was recently approached by a business professor who said, my students had used OER in a different class. How can I get that for my class? And so, yeah, it kind of starts snowballing once other people, it's kind of like once the train gets going, everybody wants to get on.
And we did curate that guide, and so I did put the URL in the chat if you just want to click on that.
And we'd love to hear from you too. We do have a survey, another survey, just to kind of understand your thoughts on our presentation, but we've got plenty of time to continue discussing as well here. But I want to get that up, so if you wanted to provide any feedback, that would be really helpful for us.
Just a reminder that folks can put questions in the Q&A, or many people are using the chat, and that would be fine as well.
And I want to just give a plug for Mary as well. She's our government documents librarian. And when working with the education department, I'm not sure how well known it is, but every government agency must produce educational resources. So there are some amazing things, and there's a government agency for just about everything you can think of. So for example, NASA has some beautiful things that teachers can use, and it's broken down all the way from K through 12. It can be interviews, simulations, all kinds of cool things that they can do, and it's absolutely free, and students can access that once they graduate as well.
I'm the government documents librarian here at UMKC as well, and boy, do I bring up government documents when we're talking about reduced cost resources or free resources for students. In the chat, MoreNet and DESI have an OER hub for K through 12 teachers. It's not great yet, but we would love to see colleges of ed contribute or use. And there's a URL there for an OER Commons hub for Missouri that would have the MoreNet and DESI OER hub in it.
Thank you. Yes, we just learned about that recently. Mary and I did. It'll be exciting to see how that gets populated.
And I did also put the URL to that government information library research guide. I have separated these out by subjects. And so there is an education tab. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit on that, there are a lot of resources for professional educators through a variety of different agencies, just as Stephanie mentioned earlier.
Well, I clicked on the link, and I'm already excited about the blog post on Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and the economic impact. That is tremendously relevant, and certainly will capture some of the student interest. Andy King, in addition to talking about the hub, we envisioned it as K through 20, so feel free to add for the hub.
Great.
Another question in the chat. Do you all think you might get any faculty pushback to marking courses as OER courses? For some, I think it might be a challenge at some institutions. So I'd also love to hear some ideas for how you all as faculty would approach that.
James, take it away.
Yeah, I get a lot of pushback. I've had pushback from my own department. They like the free sandwiches from the publishers a lot more than they like OER. For one thing, that's one situation. But from other departments, they say, what? You know, OER sounds like a lot of work. So why should I do all this? I mean, to be blunt, and I get a lot of those types of concerns right there. So unless there's like something incentive, then you're going to have a hard time with some faculty. And then there's still some of this like, well, it seems like it's old and outdated, and I show people and they still don't care because, it's one of the other two things before. They all say it's too much work, it's too much work, it's too much work. I want something that just sets it up and tells me, I can just use this, whatever, test bank question, and all these things they try and sell that say you can do assessment. And we run a course system software, something that you can just put through your LMS. All right, so those are some things. The other thing, just trying to get students this information for, I hear yeah, good idea, but it never gets done. Again, the bottom line is, you can try and persuade, but, I can't make somebody in some office somewhere take the time to put this in a place where students see it to register and so forth, because, we've shown proposals and said, hey, this could help. Maybe administrators just got to get desperate enough before they'll try and do this sort of thing. Students aren't going to go begging for this, despite how much they love this. I've never seen a student even mention this or heard of any student mentioning this to faculty, even though like in calculus or English or UI 100, they save money, but they don't even make a comment on the student reviews at the end of the semester. I and a few other my colleagues went back and looked, not one in years, 7+ years, however far we could access and get back. We even got student reviews of this one faculty member who left. I don't know if that violates some purpose, something, but we found through this stuff and we couldn't find any student who even was willing to take the time to do that. So that's part of the problem right there. We gave a presentation in front of SGA, and then the SGA people came out and said, yeah, we love it, but they've never said one word either. So, that's kind of like where I got started. I said, okay, everybody says they like this, but I'm looking for walking the walk because I'm hearing the talk and the talk. And that's why I would love to take the next step of actually getting this information to them, seeing what students are actually going to do, and then compare, here's what I'm doing versus what I'm talking and so forth. I don't know how much of it's toward the discipline. I can only speak for mine in political science and other type of social sciences. There's no real concern about this, pushback either way. Some faculty I know have been included in OER development with that open stack. So over at Rice, I believe. And, they were fine. They think it's quality product. Okay. The only pushback I've ever received is from faculty who say it's too much work, or they just are comfortable with their relationship with a publisher. I can't speak to the sciences. I don't know if it's that, but I can tell you, Stephanie might know a little bit more. The nursing faculty on this campus are doing an enormous amount with OER. So, even in something kind of different from a social science like me, they are going out there and getting stuff that makes our nursing program more affordable, yet still the same quality as any other textbook out there. So I don't really, in doing the lit review, I found nothing that discussed faculty in the sciences didn't like it as much as, I don't know, literature or whatever. So I couldn't find any literature on that either. So I honestly think it just kind of comes down to the faculty member or the administrative, I don't know how else to say it, other than capacity to go out there and make it happen. Those are, in my view, those are the biggest obstacles. Faculty who don't want to put forth the time and effort into it, and administrators who aren't real sure or whatever how to make it happen. And I know there's some faculty who are paranoid about, oh, well, my books cost more. Does that mean they're going to take somebody else's courses to mine? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some faculty may be concerned about that, but I'm also looking at it like, well, I don't know. If your class is at 8 in the, I actually asked informal a group, so I guess it would have been about 7 or 8 of them. Like, okay, $200 versus $200 in textbooks, but an easy A reputation professor, or a professor that, yeah, it's about the normal amount of workload you're going to have to work to earn your A versus free stuff. They all said, I'll pay $200 for the easy A. So I don't know if the faculty really have much to be concerned about. And granted, that was in the context of a gen ed kind of situation, and I think I noticed a student response that varied all over the map from how students view gen ed. They're much more likely to say, yeah, I just got to get out of this, versus a course that's in their major that they care about. And that's something that, you know, I teach grad courses, I teach gen ed, and that's very obvious from what I see here. So I think that the real challenge is one, kind of student getting them to actually, you know, walk the walk. But as far as faculty, I really think it boils down to getting them to do something and getting the administrators to say, okay, we're going to commit, and all they have to I would love to see them just commit to giving the information to students. It would be nice if they gave assistance to faculty to put the time and effort into this, but even if they don't, at least give students some information. But those are the biggest obstacles. And that's probably too long of a rant, but that's, I don't know, that's my honest thought on and why.
Well, there was definitely, oh, I'm sorry, Stephanie, go ahead. You're our speaker.
I've also found with when faculty are considering a new textbook because their textbooks become outdated, at our institution, every section of a course must have the exact same textbook. So if it's more of an advanced class, maybe there's only one professor involved, but as soon as you have a committee, I try to be a voice at the table and at least share some examples, because if you're already considering textbooks, it's just another textbook at that point. And so then explore, you know, it becomes a good discussion at that point. I also think that there is an element to, I think there's two components with departments. Some disciplines, it's easier and as also a specific course to find OER, especially for the math and some of the sciences, or the gen ed classes. But I think there's also a culture in different departments. There are certain departments, they're like, let's try it. We want to do this. We're going to go all in on it. And other departments are like, well, yeah, but, and they'll find every excuse under the sun for it. So it's kind of a multiple levels to that.
Another here's here for nurses. The nursing and the health studies on the UMKC's campus were way out in front and very enthusiastic about that. I'm not surprised to hear the same at Southeast Missouri State. And one of our speakers this morning, one of our presenters, had an interesting insight. I thought they have at their institution, which was Park, they have requirements that courses go through a redesign process. And so anytime that you're having to go through a redesign process on your course because it comes up, that's a perfect time that diffuses as well that argument that the faculty don't have time to do it. Because yeah, if it's a course that they have and it's running great, they don't have to redesign it. Why would I spend the time to do it? But if it's every 3 years, they need to do a course redesign anyway to update things because the institution or the department requires it, then that's an opportunity to look at those materials like Stephanie said, and it's just another choice. So.
Well,
I think we do have to look for those positive connections to make with faculty. So we were actually invited to present our research to Faculty Senate and got some very positive responses. Stephanie had several reach out to her because of that.
Yes. And also looking at those positive opportunities at our institution, every 5 years, departments can reevaluate their promotion tenure criteria. And in this last go round that we're doing at the library, we have added an element about OER. And so that's another way to incentivize faculty so that they can have their work recognized. It can be even just a component for teaching effectiveness or collaboration sorts of things with other faculty, however it looks like. But that might be enough of a carrot to encourage faculty. It's not punitive per se, but it's an opening and a way to build that dialogue.
Well, are there any more questions for the Q&A or in the chat? And thank you for everyone who submitted questions. And thank you, Mary, Stephanie, and James. This was a really wonderful discussion and talk about these things that are being done at Missouri, Southeast Missouri State. And I was really excited to learn about them and learn from your experiences. So, yes. So this is our last session of the day, except for our virtual happy hour, which is at 4. We welcome you to join us for that, to further discuss ideas, ask questions, or just mingle with other people who are interested in OER. And since this is our last session time, the Missouri A and OER Planning Committee thanks you for attending the 2024 Missouri A and OER Conference.